Welcome to the Prevent the Preventable podcast, where quite simply, we're on a mission to help you live longer by preventing health complications before they start. Every year, there are millions of cases of brain hemorrhage, but there really doesn't have to be. And at the Natalie Kate Moss Trust, we're committed to ensuring that those that don't have to happen don't. In this podcast, you will learn more about brain hemorrhages, their causes, how to prevent them, and so much more. Expect honest, straightforward conversations that will give you the information you need to take back control of your own health and potentially prevent the preventable. Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Prevent the Preventable podcast. On today's episode, we have Amber Jeffery. Now, Amber is a podcast host, an online facilitator, and the founder of the Grief Gang. Amber's story started when she lost her mum at the age of just 19. And she now has made it her life's work to support others with their grief. Now, grief, unfortunately, is a universal feeling that we will all feel at some time or another, but it is a very complicated feeling and very individual too. For those who have lost somebody to a brain hemorrhage, and I know that feeling all too well, it can be a very traumatic grief and one that is very, very difficult to navigate for many, many reasons. Today with Amber, we will unpack her story, as well as what is grief, how do we deal with it, and can we move forward from it? This can be a difficult subject for many, but Amber makes it so accessible and so easy to talk about, and it's very easy to have this conversation with her. So without further ado, let's dive into the episode. Amber, welcome. I'm very excited about this podcast. Which is quite odd to say because of the topic of the podcast. But what I want to do to start with is roll all the way back and to understand what happened when you were 19. Because at that point in life when we should be having fun, we should be really carefree. Mm-hmm. We should really kind of, to a degree, still be a child. Mm-hmm. We should be making mistakes. Life shouldn't be too serious, but your life changed in, a single day. And so can you explain more about actually what happened on that day?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's really lovely to be in this lovely studio as well. So, yeah, you're so right. Everything you said there, it does make me think of how quickly I did have to grow up. And it's only really been in my later, as time has moved forward, that, and I've got later into my 20s, that I realised, oh my gosh, yeah, I really was just a child. That teen part of the age, I didn't really sit with that actual teen part of the age I was when my mum died. But yeah, my mum suddenly died of a heart attack, age 51, and me being 19. And it was completely just not on the cards, as I think a lot of people who maybe experience a sudden death know that. But there was no kind of indicator that a heart attack for her was on the cards. It just really did come completely out of the blue. And it was a whirlwind 24 hours, and it just catapulted me, my brother, our family just into, as we know, this world of grief and unknown. And previous to that, I'd never really experienced a death properly in my family, other than the side of grandparents. But my mum was my first primary loss and most intimate relationship in my life. There was no template to figure out, how do you navigate grief at 19? And I looked around at my peers and, do you know? No one knew. Even the people older than me in my family and peer groups, they didn't really have a template, because to navigate grief as a teenager and in your early 20s, it is kind of this isn't meant to happen at this time. And it did, as you said, made me grow up completely overnight. Overnight, my priorities, my values just completely changed, and grappling with that, or even the people around me, my friends, family, partners, that was a lot for them to grapple with as well, of kind of me just kind of becoming this whole person. Even for myself, the grief for my identity of who I was within the space of 24 hours was really stark, and that was a really tough part of my grief journey too, not only just holding the grief for my mum, but holding the grief for myself of my kind of adolescence and my youth and frivolousness, totally.
Yeah, absolutely. I can really relate to that, because when Natalie passed away, I was 20, so very similar age. Totally. I was 3 weeks before my 21st. I was literally meant to go on a night out for my friends. But, you know, it was so kind of obvious and like it was very dramatic in the sense of that contrast between the devastating nature of grief and this like really joyous, carefree life that all my friends were living. And I think that sense of loss of identity is kind of exaggerated even more so by your friends around you who carry on living that life and you can't. And I think that makes it somehow a lot harder. It makes it a lot more confusing, certainly. I think, you know, you put it in a way of like, there is no template because certainly the people around you, your friends, don't have that template. I think there's never really a template, to be honest.
No, we're looking for it. It's never there.
No, absolutely. And I think whenever you experience grief, whether it's at 19, 20 or 40 or 60,
totally.
you know, I think that there are definitely lessons and there are definitely tools that you can use, but everyone's grief is so incredibly different. I think it's really important for people to remember that, you know, you're on your own journey. Yeah. You know, we hope you're on a journey and there is a way forward, but you're on your own journey as well.
Totally.
So let's go back to your mum. What was she like?
Yeah, I love this question. Because it is, and I think that in grief as well. And when we're talking about it, I think so much we can lose the person in that of who it is actually this grief and all this tending to our grief is actually for. And it's a thing that, I really, really encourage of anyone that I work with and just in general, like ask people about their people. Like it's so important. So thank you for asking. My mum, she was like, yay high, like so diddy, but so just feisty, like angry. I just think I'm reeling off all my lovely qualities, but a true powerhouse, but like was so unconditional in everything, and especially with me and my brother. She was community embodied pretty much, and like our door was always open. You know, she was our home was the hub, and she created that, and she was just always there for her friends, for her family, no matter what time of day. You know, sometimes it probably was the detriment of herself of giving too much, but she just always believed in giving back. And she was a very, you know, because I was still a teenager, she was essentially still a caregiver for me. Wasn't, you know, doing everything for me, but did a lot for me.
I mean, I'm 33. My mum still does an awful lot for me. When she listens to this, she's going to laugh at that.
And it was like she was, there I was, working, and I was with my partner, and I was on my way to adulthood, and she was like, my kids are okay, they're all settled, they're fine. But she was still a mother, and she was a real quite in your face type of mum, not like overbearing, but was always like, where you going, who you with, when you're back, are you safe? Like she always cared, she was always there, but she gave us so much freedom to explore, to make mistakes, to understand that in life sometimes you make mistakes and there's not a second time around, and that you have to figure things out if you like them, if it's a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a job, whatever it might be. She really wasn't a parent who would kind of like intervene. She would if we were, of course, in danger or anything, but she'd be like, you need to figure that out. You need to go down that path and go, oh shit, maybe that wasn't for me, or that was a bad mistake, and learn from it. And I really appreciated that, because I looked around my peers at that time and kind of their parents weren't like that. They were quite overbearing and would quite literally force their children's life. Like, for example, my GCSEs, I completely flunked my GCSEs. I met my partner that I'm with now in school, so around that time. And my mum at the time was like, you need to be less concerned about him and your boyfriend and be revising, you know. She kind of did in that way. And I was like, yeah, I am. And I wasn't. And then GCSE results day came and I completely failed everything. And I was like, oh, shit. But she never was like, I told you so. Yeah. She was like, you needed to get that yourself, that if you don't apply yourself, you won't get the results. If you don't, do whatever, that's the consequences. And it was never of judgment. It was just like, what are your lessons going to be from this? And she gave us like the platform to always build again, like build again from stuff.
Do you feel like that has those characteristics of her and sort of that way that she brought you up, in a sense of, right, you've got to go and think for yourself about this, and give you that platform to rebuild in a way like you just said, has helped you after her death to rebuild and to create the grief gang?
I don't think I realised how much those lessons, that template she gave us has really formalised not only my work but even like my moral compass. Because when she died, I remember being like, I will be okay, like functionally. Like she taught me how to cook, to clean, to look after me, to be self-sufficient. I'll never forget, she never taught me how to do the washing machine though. And so when I never forget after she died, like going to do my first wash load, and I looked at the washing machine like it was a time machine. I was like, oh my God. But most other things she did teach me, you pull from within, it is all there. And so thinking later on in life when I started Grief Gang, it was like, it wasn't that tools and that knowledge was started and stemmed from me. It totally stemmed from her. Of building that, like you fall down, you get up, and you figure out a plan. And it's like, it might not be the plan that you thought it was going to be, but there is always a plan. There's always a solution and a way out. And it might not be the way out that you thought it is, but there is a way forward in life, like totally.
I think it's a really beautiful way to honour her though as well, by helping other people. You know, you mentioned around like she was very much there for other people, and you know, she's still doing that.
Yeah, totally. She worked in the charity sector, like she loved it. I'd never really understood why she was in the charity sector before. But before she died, then I learned more about the charity sector. She was in it, and she worked for a hospice charity as well, which I found so interesting. And I have found it really interesting how I've kind of followed in ways of similar nature and similar industry of way of kind of working with people that are dying and people who are then bereaved as well after that. It's really interesting. I kind of think, I've kind of followed in her footsteps, but in a different path. But in a very, very similar way, totally.
And we'll come on to that. We'll come on to the Grief Gang and explain more about that and how you do help people. Going back to when you were 19, do you remember much around that initial, you know, you spoke about like the 24 hours, but those initial few hours, few days, few weeks, do you remember how you felt at that time?
Yeah, I do remember pockets, and it's, you know, anyone listening who knows grief and in yourself, it can be really grey, can't it? There's like big chunks that are completely blocked out, and I've definitely resigned to the fact that some things will just be locked away forever, like whether it's the trauma, and they will just stay locked away. But a few things I do remember is, so she died in the morning of the 25th of June, and by the evening, our house was completely full. And we knew, completely full. And I know for some people, it's like that's their worst nightmare. They're just like, I wish when that happened, people weren't there. For me, my brother, we were so happy for it. And it was, I don't even remember putting the call out. I don't remember saying, come over. People just did because our home for so long had been the hub. I think people just naturally felt that pull. They must have checked like if it was okay. But our house was just flooded with food. I think we got a little bit pissed, we got a bit drunk. Yeah. But I just remember, being there, remember having all my friends. I remember even my driving instructor came. I'm thinking about it now. I remember it was so funny because I remember I'd passed my driving test. This is when I think about it, I think I was so young. Yeah. I'd passed my driving test about a month before. So my driving instructor was still quite in my life, and she was a lovely instructor. And I remember she was there. I remember actually taking stock of who was in the garden with us. I was like, my driving instructor's here, like, what the hell? But it was just, everyone just felt the calling to come. Yeah. And that kind of what was the couple of weeks after, our house was always full, there was always someone round. And I remember I had just started like my first essential big girl job at the airport, and I remember feeling really like, I need to go back to work. And I did. I went back like 4-5 days after. She started the Saturday, I went back the Thursday. And it was part of like, I've just started this job, I need to make a good impression. But I say that, but the real reason was I was like, I wanted to get out. I wanted to go back and be semi-normal. I wanted to be just a 19-year-old girl who started a job, was really excited about it. And there was definitely elements of escapism in it, but more so I was like, I just want a routine. I didn't want to be pinging around. I always said the house just stunk of her. Her papers were on the table, like how she left it on that Friday morning. Our fridge still had milk that was in date still from before she died. I was just like, I don't want to be here. If I can go out for like 8 hours of the day into a really busy airport and work there, I'd rather do that for a little bit. And so I did that, and then I took some time off across the funeral. And I remember, kind of trying to, what you said earlier as well, being like, I can't be like my friends. That really resonated because I remember really trying to like infiltrate my way back into my social circles and just feeling like I was like a triangle trying to fit into a circle hole. I was like, oh, this just isn't fitting at all. And just trying to be a regular 19-year-old who wants to go out to the club, have a good time with her friends. I was like, but I'm emotionally not okay. Like my nervous system was totally fucked. Like it was gone. And that was kind of the summer. And I remember bits of that. And then kind of that first year is all a bit blank.
Yeah.
Really blank.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because I feel like that whenever I've been through grief, is that there are really clear memories and then there's these like big holes as well. And it's so interesting when you speak to people who've been through similar things, you know, and we will all go through grief, but, you know, these ideas of everyone's there. I remember when, because Natalie died in London, we came up home, we live in Lancashire, and we came home and suddenly, like, all my family were there in the house, and or they'd appeared overnight. You know, it was just kind of like, it was like you wake up and everyone's there. It's so odd.
All corners of the country, people come and you're like, wow, I didn't know you could get here so fast.
And I totally appreciate, you know, what you were saying in terms of like, you almost don't want them there because it's busy. You don't want to talk to anyone, but equally, you know, I didn't want to be alone as well. You know, so it was this difficulty of trying to find the balance between the two, and equally what you were saying about, I want normality, I want to be with my friends, but I'm not normal anymore.
Yeah.
And who am I?
What is my new normal?
Yeah. Totally. And I think that's a huge part of the journey of grief, is figuring that out, because your whole perspectives about everything change. Yeah. And it's such a pivotal moment in your life when you're 19 as well. You know, your whole understanding about the importance of life. What is important? Yeah. Is it as important to be going out and just getting dressed up and like getting drunk on a Saturday? And it's confusing. Yeah. It's really confusing.
It's like how in a space of, so right. Like, I remember really thinking about that too, of before my mum died, my biggest concern in a week would be, what is my outfit going to be on Saturday? Where are we going? What are we drinking? And it's like that in a week. It wasn't that I did enjoy it to a degree, but I was like, I just didn't give it as much airtime anymore. I still wanted it, but I remember I would meet friends and they would talk about like boyfriend issues or guys they're dating, and I'd just be like, is that really the hill you're dying on? Like, are you really, this is what the spilt milk you're going to cry about? And that was a balance. And when I talk about things like that now, and especially with people that I work with, it's not that when your friend is, you know, after the death of a loved one, and they're talking about their woes, or, you know, because it has to be, you know, reciprocal in relationships, of course. But when they're moaning about, let's say, a boyfriend or something, and to you, that's like this, like, you're like, oh, okay. But to them, that is their world exploding. Like, our bandwidth in grief, we might not feel it, but it is so much bigger, like, because we have been on the scale of, fuck, people can just die like that. So your bandwidth for, like, what is worth losing your head over is completely different to your peers. And so it is, but when you're 19, when I was 19, I didn't know how to extend compassion like that. I didn't know how to hold, in my world, this isn't very big or would warrant for me losing my head over, but for you, you're my friend and I love you, or whoever it is, and this is really big to you, so I want to be there for you and find an equal balance. When I was 19, my frontal lobe wasn't developed. I was like, I didn't understand holding both hands. So I was just like, you're stupid. Yeah. You're stupid.
Did you lose people as a result of that, friends and things?
Yeah, I just really, like I said, that bandwidth, I didn't realise my bandwidth was bigger, but like I was saying, my threshold for what was worth losing your head over was bigger, but my compassion for others, it wasn't at all. I hadn't, you know, that bone people talk about of your empathy bone really builds in grief, and it does. Mine took a bit of a while to come in.
But I think that's having empathy for the stuff that matters. Do you know the point? I agree.
Totally.
Like, it really doesn't matter if, I don't know, that top you wanted to buy for Saturday night is out of stock, you know, and I 100% agree with that. Yeah. And still today, I find that really frustrating when people,
it's tough.
You know, and it is tough because, as you say, you want to empathise and whatnot, but there is this scale of what does matter and what is worth losing your head over, because, you know, you mentioned before about your nervous system and like what's worth like triggering our nervous system all the time.
That is very much, you know, thinking about it enough, Fiona, that is literally it. I think when you have in grief, our nervous systems are affected by everything. You know, I'm no neurologist or psychologist, but I'm really fascinated with it, especially for myself. It is, I think that's a huge part when there's perhaps people in your life who are really like up here, and you're like, why are you driving your nervous system over something so for me, like, I'm very conscious of like the cortisol rising. So I'm like, no, we're not going to rise to that. You know, it only rises for really things that need to be. So when you see someone just absolutely off the Richter scale, you're like, calm down.
Yeah.
Like, it's okay. And it does come out. I was like, did anyone die? Did anyone die? Yeah. No, like, it's okay. It's repairable. Yeah. But I did, lose a lot of friends, and a fair few of them at my own hand. And it's interesting, some of them have come back into my life now, and strangely as well, like some of them have experienced death of their parents as well. And it wasn't the sole reason why we came back into each other's lives, but it was, I look back at that period and losing those friends and how it happened. of we were just a couple of kids just trying to figure out some of life's really big stuff.
But also they didn't know. Do you know what I mean? They
And
were
I can
also
extend
kids.
so much, exactly.
And
that.
how, you know...
In the time I couldn't, I was just like, you're all awful and you don't care for me. But I remember not even really that long after, a couple of years had passed, and I think starting Grief Gang was such a gift for that for me, to look back in hindsight and go, we were just some kids just trying to figure some really, really heavy stuff out that people, even in their 40s and 50s, would really struggle with in a friendship group. Yeah. We're just a bunch. We've got teen on the end of our age. Yeah. Let's extend a bit of compassion. And when I was able to do that, I was able to see it more from their lens of being like, shit, like one of my best mates just lost her mum. I loved her mum as well. I have no idea how to handle this. How do we navigate this? And there were some friends that I have absolutely, no interest in rekindling. And that every relationship that has ended for me subsequently in my grief, I don't regret. Yeah, it's had to, and it's formed me where I am today. But there are ones where you just think, oh yeah, if we opened our mouths and communicated, and that does work both sides. If I opened my mouth and communicated in a way that would actually convey what I was really feeling, but I didn't have the language. Yeah. I didn't know how to say, I'm so hurting inside that my mum has died. Mine was easier to come out in anger and just say, get fucked, I don't want to know you anymore. Yeah. Go away. That was an easier skin for me to slip into rather than vulnerability.
Yeah. I think there's a huge conversation we could have there in a whole nother podcast potentially, but around, communication and learning those skills of the language of emotions that I don't, even I had this conversation this week that I think growing up, a lot of us didn't have the right language for our emotions. And when you are faced with a very traumatic event, you don't know how to handle it. You might have all these emotions, whether it's anger or sadness or whatnot, but you can't put them into words and you can't communicate them.
And it comes out in totally different behaviour that is maybe not like normal to you. And you're like, when I was so angry, I was like, this isn't me. I was like, I'm not... I was comfortable in that skin, but I was like, I know this isn't me to my core. Yeah. But I couldn't help it. It was what was comfortable to come out.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've spoken about your friends in terms of them not being able to necessarily deal with it. And you actually spoke earlier about having a template to try and deal with grief. Did your family structure, what did that look like post your mum dying? Did you feel like you got support from them?
As a family, so it was me and my immediate family, my brother and my dad. And my parents were split before my mum died. And it was an interesting one. Me and my brother, it was like we've always supported each other, but in totally different ways. So initially...
Are they older? Or
he's older, 7 years older. So when mum died, my brother went into... Well, he went like he chose to. He had to go into a lot of, admin and taking that over because he was legally next of kin. My dad was, but my brother was in hand of most of it. And so he did have to go into practical mode. And that took, as we know with admin, some things can go on for a very long time. So for about a good year, he was kind of in that, kind of like renovated our home, like it needed a lot of things. Like we were all now living under one roof. So there was just a lot of stuff to do, and he had to. So he kind of kept calm and carried on. And so I had a bit more, and he did so much to protect me, to allow me to just have some form of a normal 19-year-old life. Like when I look back, I remember at the time really feeling like things he was doing was isolating me from it and not including me, and being like, you're just taking it all, or you're just running away, but you're not including me. And actually it wasn't. It was like, he was like, I don't want to bog you down with talking about things like, death in service and whatever it might be. You're 19. I wanted to try and just protect whatever of that little bubble that you had left still, to just be a normal teenager for one more year sort of thing.
Equally, that's a lot for him to take on as well, because when he says you were only 19, he was only 26.
He was my age, actually my age now. Yeah, a year younger. And when I think about it, it is so interesting, as you go older and you reach ages that maybe people in your life have gone through traumas or really big hardships. And I think now, oh my God, if I had a younger sibling and our mum died now, and I was like, I better look after myself. Yeah. Let alone then now a household, and then my younger sister, and go like, right, okay, like when I think, because when you're 19, you think 26, 27-year-olds are so grown up. You're like, oh my God, you're really old. And you and then you get there, and I'm like, I'm thinking now, that would be completely life-altering. Like, it is life-altering. Not only losing your mum, but like, wow, yeah, I've got huge responsibilities here on the shoulder. And so we butted heads quite a lot of that. I really wanted more like emotion from him, but he was in like, I've got to get shit done. Like we've got to do this. And Dad kind of played like a lovely mediator between us, because we really argued, me and my brother. We didn't speak for like 9 months in 2019. It was really, really tough, because we were both in so much pain, but just speaking about that pain in totally different languages. But we were singing from the same hymn sheet, but we didn't know how to look at each other and be like, this really hurts, doesn't it? And it did take until like, we didn't speak. We had a really bad falling out in 2019, and then we kind of came back to, and it was when I started Grief Gang. And it was when I kind of went off on my own quest, just to be like, let me find the words for me to try and explain how I feel, and then come back into my kind of family dynamic and be like, this is how I feel about mum, and this is how I want to articulate it. And it has done leaps and bounds for our relationship, and kind of, I think in family dynamics, especially, if you're sharing that loss, I always say to people, the best way, or a way that I found, was just finding a way to just mutually respect how each other are dealing with things. And it is so hard. It's so much easier said than done.
Yeah.
But when you are looking at your sibling or whoever it might be, and you're like, we've lost the same person or a really integral person in our life, and why can't you just do it like me, or why can't I do it like you? It's like we're just all going to grieve differently. And how I'm maybe quite overt with talking about grief, like just being online. My brother might be more introverted. And if that's what he wants to do, that's totally fine. It's the word of just respect, I always find. Just find that respect of, you do that, I'm going to do me. But if we need each other, we've always got each other. And that took time to build that and genuinely to believe that. I think for a while I told myself a lot like, I do respect how my brother grieves, but didn't. Yeah. But actually finally coming to a place of, no, I do respect however he wants to grieve, as long as it is helping him and it's not just like a cover. Whatever he needs to do to support himself, I respect that and I understand that. And then it's not going to always be, it'll look like how I will do it potentially.
A huge thank you to Colony Coworking for supporting us with this first series of the Prevent the Preventable podcast, and for providing us with this beautiful studio too. Now, at the Natalie Kate Moss Trust, we are a small team working remotely, but on a mission to make a big difference. But finding the balance between flexible working and working in inspiring spaces surrounded by inspiring people can be a hard balance to strike sometimes. Colony is an expanding network of co-working spaces in Manchester, a place for entrepreneurs, creatives, freelancers, startups, and established businesses. A place where everyone comes together, where ideas pollinate and businesses flourish. And Colony is helping NKMT do just that by supporting us with this podcast, by helping us reach more people with this vital message, and ultimately helping us to prevent the preventable. To find out more about how Colony can help your business grow, head to the show notes now. So I think a huge part for me within my family, I feel like I was brought up in a very traditional family in a way of like managing emotions. Stoicism was a very normal thing, and I feel like I've learned a different definition of stoicism as I've got older. It's not about ignoring emotions, but acknowledging them and being able to move through them. Whereas I think I was brought up with a definition that was ignoring them, pushing things under the carpet. I think for me at 20, I would have been basically 21. Yeah. That I did a very similar thing to what you did. You went back to work 6 days later. I just carried on with uni. I just kind of cracked on, tried to be normal as much as possible, and suppressed those emotions for a long time. Didn't have the language to communicate them. Didn't have the, capability to, let people know how I feel and really kind of dig into things. I thought that therapy was, for mad people in a way.
Exactly the same. I was exactly the same.
I didn't want to do that. And so Natalie died when I was 20. I probably don't think I went to therapy until I was maybe 27. And that was probably for another issue, grieving again. I've spent a lot of time unpicking, not just how I felt, but why I felt a certain way, why I navigated my experiences in a certain way, how supported I was, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that is not just, that's a very common feeling for a lot of people and a common way of dealing with grief. There's probably certain generations, probably certain genders who lean into that way a little bit more. But I do think it is very, very common. I don't know whether you experience anything similar in terms of like trying to navigate that stoicism that's around you and how that affected you, because I know it affected me quite significantly.
It's interesting, yeah. Is it stoicism? Stoicism, yeah. Because I think there is something to take from it too. There is a benefit too, absolutely. And it is, again, finding that balance, because if we, in grief and going through a loss, every feeling that comes like really lands on us, we won't get up and do nothing. We won't. So sometimes a sprinkling of stoicism, sort of like, oh yeah, this person has died and this is really fucking sad, but I do need to go to work. Yeah. I need to make a living. I need to keep a roof over my head. If you've got children, I need to look after my children. I need to do that. So kind of compartmentalizing things to get through. It's kind of like survival mode. And to get through a day, a period, can be really beneficial. Yeah. But when it's the complete other end, when it is just keep calm and carry on, which I feel is the definition of stoicism, or some people's version of it, that's when it's like, this is real, just burying underneath. So it's, in my family, I don't know if stoicism was strictly in kind of like our dynamic, but I think, like I was saying in the beginning, I think we definitely utilised it in a way that did benefit us. Like, I often talk about how I kind of sometimes, because life is, I think as you get older, isn't it, you always think, oh, when life just settles down a bit, I'll then maybe tend to the grief, or I'll do something. And then just years go by and you're like, oh yeah, life just doesn't slow down. I have to make the time for it. There is never going to be the perfect window to maybe start maybe a form of therapy and doing that. You're like, oh, I have to carve this out, sort of thing. And so I do live by stoicism in some ways, and kind of get to, I call them like kind of checkpoints in my life. So kind of like, there's a lot going up, like even this month alone, it's like a big anniversary at the end of this weekend. So like this week I've been like, right, my checkpoint is Friday this week. Like I'll go home tomorrow and I'll just be like, but like I carve that out. But kind of for now it's keep calm and carry on. And it's a part of me that I think I used to be a bit like, are you faking it till you're making it kind of thing? And it's not. It is just kind of building that taking from that resilience. Yeah. You know, resilience in grief can be a bit of like a grey area, because I've come to the realisation that I don't enjoy when people tell me I'm strong and you're so resilient, but I love claiming it for myself. I love saying, yeah, I'm resilient. This last year alone, I've realised, oh my God, I can literally walk through hot hell on hot coals and still come out on top. And be like, you have so much resilience in you. But when it's thrown on you, I'm like, oh, no, I don't like that. I don't like that. And kind of figuring out, what does resilience look like to you? How does using stoicism or using and benefiting from a survival mode period of your life actually can kind of benefit for you, but being honest with yourself of, we can't live like this forever. Yeah, 100%.
I 100% agree with that. I think there is a balance between, you have to go to get on, like, people die. And I know that's it sounds probably not the tagline for this episode, but people die.
It sounds so brutal, but it is.
And I think if we sit in this place of we're just going to mourn for the rest of our lives, then we're almost not honouring them by not living our lives, you know? So they didn't get these extra days. They're not here today, you know? So I think there's a balance between the acknowledgement of how it's affected you, because if we don't address it, our body doesn't forget. You know, that stress and that pain and that anger, that, you know, those emotions you spoke about before have got to go somewhere. So they've got to live in our body. So, you know, there'll be countless of other podcasts that talk about this, but, you know, stored emotions from traumatic events will in some way manifest. And whether that is an illness or however it manifests down the line, it will. So we have to find that balance between, okay, we need to address this, but we don't need to spend every single moment of every single day reacting to every single emotion.
We've just got to, I think I definitely want to add and caveat in here is that, on days when you're like, I just need to just keep calm and carry on and keep moving, that doesn't equate to then moving forward and carving into a life where you tend to the grief and you put it away forever. That's what I think can maybe in stoicism get, and sort of that like push up a lip, keep calm, carry on, can get conflated with, is that doing that is not like essentially not honouring and bringing your person with you. Finding a way to honour them and continue with your life is the perfect way. But kind of I could often feel with stoicism and kind of that it feels like to live a life, to move forward, it means to sacrifice tending to grief. And it's not, I think, to live a life that helps you move forward is to continuously tend to that grief. And tending to that grief isn't always going to be maybe in the tears in the morning. It will be in life experiences, in moving forward with your life. And that can be so hard, is that people feel like when they're moving forward with their life and finding a way to regulate their emotions and their nervous system every single day and finding a pattern or a routine that really helps, and they think, oh God, I'm doing okay, like I'm doing well. But does that mean I've completed grief? I've left it? And it's like, no, like you're living your life and finding ways along that, beautiful life that you've carved out for yourself as well to like bring your person, bring your grief into it as well. It's like a beautiful like oscillation.
I think one thing that I'm sure a lot of people will share this feeling, and it's one thing that has sat in my mind at times where I didn't necessarily want to deal with grief. This isn't a conscious thought that I kind of was very active about, but I think it's sat in the subconscious. I didn't necessarily want to deal with grief because I didn't want to move forward, because by moving forward, I'm moving away from them and I'm
leaving them
in some respect. And that's complicated. That's difficult. You know, there'll always be a part of you, of course, by supporting yourself. That doesn't mean that you are leaving them behind. But this is where grief is complicated because there is an emotion or a subconscious thought that will hold you back in different areas. And I think unpicking those thoughts and reframing them potentially is a really powerful tool to move forward. And obviously we're speaking about like people deal with grief in so many different ways. There is no right way to deal with grief. But we do need more support, and we do need environments to, be able to process our grief, and conversations to be able to talk about our, the people that we've lost, but also how we're dealing with it and hear from other people. And I know that's ultimately what you've created with the Grief Gang. So firstly, what is the Grief Gang?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's got many hats. So the Grief Gang, it initially just started out as, not just, but it was after those 3 years after my mum died, and after those 3 years of suppressing the grief and kind of looking around, and I tried at the time, not long after my mum died, I tried to gain some counselling. I remember the timings were just awful. Like they would call up and be like, oh, we've got a slot open at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday. And I was like just in full-time employment. I was like, I've got a job. Like I don't have that. It was just so inaccessible. And then I just kind of was like, take me off your wait list. I'm going back to work. And I went into stoicism, keep calm, carry on. And like I said, and that did, it served me for 3 years until it didn't. And, I was in it for a long time until grief finally went, we need to talk. And I was like, oh, shit, okay. And I tried to access counselling and therapy again. And I did kind of move a bit more forward with it. And it just was a really terrible experience for me. And that took a lot of years to unpack, and I only went back into therapy room this year. So yeah, kind of like you, 7 years kind of later. Well, yeah, quite a long, long time. And I tried, and at the time I felt that I'd failed. I'd look back now and it wasn't a failure, but at the time I felt I tried to get therapy and support and I'd failed. And I remember just feeling like therapy isn't for me right now, and I don't want to do that. But surely that's not the only option for me. Like there's got to be other people out there where therapy hasn't stuck with them the first time round. And so I just went from one extremity to the other and just said, it just came in like a bingo like moment, and just I went, I'm going to start a podcast on grief. And my partner was like, what the fuck?
So that's actually how it started. I didn't appreciate the podcast was the very first thing.
It was the first thought.
Yeah.
But actually then starting it. So we were on holiday, and I just remember really like, I want to find things out there. So I remember searching for other grief podcasts, and there was like a few at the time, like Carriad, amazing. And I was like, oh my God, there's a whole community here. And I remember just feeling like, I want to hear something from maybe like, at the time then, like a younger voice like me, and similar age and demographic. And I just couldn't find it quite at the time. So I just went, oh, I'm going to do it. And it was so unlike me, because for my whole life until that point, I had never been a child, a young adult who had been like, oh, there's a problem, I'm going to fix it. I'm lazy by nature. I'm so lazy by nature. So for me to see it, I was kind of went, I'm going to do it. And then so my partner was like, okay. And then we came home, I got all the gear, and I was just like, I was kind of moving and not really, my brain was kind of catching up, like, what are we doing? And I was just I knew in my core this was going to be what helped me. There was no plan for it to be what it is today. I just knew I need to just put me out there, cast my net out wide, and see what I pull in, and if I hopefully pull in a few people who know what this experience is like as well. And so I launched it, it was 5 years ago last week, half a decade, it's wild. I'm like, oh my God, I've got a 5-year-old. And people, at first it was like friends and family supporting, like, oh, what's Amber up to? And I really thought, oh, I'll do this for like a year maybe. And I think a lot of people around me did as well. They just thought, she's gone a bit erratic here. She's gone a little bit, I don't know. Last month she was in a really deep depressive pit, and now she's doing something that is potentially being like a support. And in the initial stages, it wasn't, I wanted to support people. I didn't know that's what I wanted to do, but by default, that's what it was doing. And so I posted my first ever episode and just basically told my story from A to Z and every single detail kind of in it, and just put it out. And then more people were coming and being like, yeah, I've lost my mum, I've lost my person, whoever it might have been. And then it just started growing. And then I was like, I'm really interested in other people's experiences, got them on the podcast. And then I branched out further from just like mother and parental loss, met people who've lost their children, their siblings, their partners. I just became really hungry for it, of like, I'm so intrigued of people and how we tick, how we don't, how we navigate through grief. And then, that's kind of been it for the past 5 years. And then the online community is growing, and I've just got a wonderful community who support each other as well. That's the part, like, it's so, I am nothing in the grand scheme of it. And I genuinely do mean that, and not trying to be like, oh, I'm not, like, I genuinely mean, I'm just a vessel. And the community looks after itself. It is such a compassionate community. I've never known anything like it. And so, my kind of role is now. And then last year I went full-time self-employed and offering people group one-to-one and group mentoring. And it's been the best thing I've ever done with my life completely. I get to meet people every single day and get them to meet each other and find their like mini grief gangs, essentially.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because you talk about, when you did the podcast and you went in to talk about all these different types of topics, because grief is just not one topic. It's an arena of multitude of topics. When I thought it was going to be a year, I got to a year and I was like, funny, Amber. Like, I still now, 5 years, do not feel like I have scratched 30% of what I could talk about in grief. Well, I mean, even just recording this episode,
exactly.
I'm like, oh my gosh, we could talk about that and that, and I'm kind of pulling
it's
myself
so
back.
True.
But even just breaking it down on the opposite levels, you could be talking, like you said, you could be talking about somebody who's lost a child, a baby versus a child who's an adult. A parent. That grief will also be different depending on the relationship, depending on the circumstances surrounding. It's so varied. Yeah. It's varied. Their experience of grief is varied on, how they were brought up, how they were told, they learn how to communicate. It's so varied. And this is what I think makes it so complicated to help people to navigate. But I have no doubt there are some commonalities between people in terms of their struggles and challenges and fears and beliefs and whatnot. So if somebody's listening to this, for example, who has been through grief, whatever that looks like, what are some common things that they might be coming up against that you hear quite often that potentially, we could kind of unwrap now?
Yeah, it's a great question. As you said, on the base of what you were just saying before, there is so many experiences, but kind of the common themes or like questions. I mean, the one question that I get all the time, it normally starts with, am I normal? All the time. Or a text,
none of us are normal.
And
like,
then,
whatever we've been through.
And I just always go, what is normal?
Yeah.
I go, tell me first off, what do you define as normal? Yeah. Normal for us and what we deem as normal is based off so much, of our social economic, everything, how we've been raised. It is so formed that. So I could say, that's really not normal. If I was to, I never do, but if I was being weird, I'd be like, that's not normal. And you take that as gospel. Don't listen to me, because what your definition of normal is completely defined by you. But anyway, I get so many things of this and that. Am I normal? So there's so many things. So what some of them questions might be is things like, I've reached the year mark of my person who's died, and I still cry every single day, or I don't feel any different from the day before. Am I normal? And I always go, I equate it to, like when people say you turn 30. People say, oh, do you feel 30? Or you're like, I still feel exactly the fucking same as I did yesterday. Yeah. Because it's not the actual date itself. It doesn't hold anything. And I think people know that, of course, to an extent, but I think so much goes back to expectations. That's one thing I'd say too. I think a real tough thing I see with people that I work with just in the community is how much expectations, not only from others and around us, whether it's close, intimate people, friends, family, peers, colleagues, to like wider, to their society's expectations, to expectations on ourselves as well. A lot of things in grief and things we struggle with do come back to kind of expectations and kind of, the expectation of it's a year. Why do I not feel any better, or do I not feel any more safer in my nervous system, or have a bit of like a grasp on things? I'm expecting people in my life to still be showing up for me, but they're not showing up for me in this way that I want. So much comes back to expectations. And with expectations, I really do encourage people to, especially for ones that maybe we might have of people around us and kind of our peer groups, because when in grief, when you don't get your like expectations met, sometimes you don't realise you have an expectation until it's not been met. Sometimes you just think, oh, that's the baseline. And then if someone doesn't meet it, and you're like, oh, no, I did have an expectation on that. To really sit with that, because sometimes you can feel like, oh, well, I just have no expectations of anyone around me ever again. If we were to have no expectations of anyone around, we'd be sociopaths. You would be clinically probably diagnosed as a sociopath or a psychopath, because like to not expect things from the relationships around you. And not when I say the word expect, I think can be so loaded of like, well, I expect this, and it's not. And it's something that I really work with people a lot about. Of let's actually just sit with what they are. Let's name it. And some, they just share a lot of, I just expect for people just to like hold me during a difficult time, like an anniversary season or a birthday, to just check in. And I go, and do you think that's too much to ask for? And then sitting there like, no, it's not. It's kind of setting almost in a way like your non-negotiables. It's having a standard, like having a standard for yourself as well. And like external relationships, that can obviously be a bigger piece. But like the expectations that we sometimes put on ourselves, we can think, like going back to that example of, oh, it's come to a year and I've expected to feel better or whatever it is. And I often sit and I say, where's that expectation come from? And more times than most, some people will say, oh, well, I expected it of myself. I go, but you haven't just pulled out your arse though. Let's look around you. Where have you developed this idea that you should be after a year done with grief? Some people really think they need to be done with grief by a year. Yeah. And normally when we strip it back, it's never just that voice, that expectation hasn't just like been plucked into your head. It's been stemmed from media, from what you're consuming, from maybe other people in your life who have gone through bereavement, and you've kind of seen them be like, well, when they were at a year, they were kind of a bit better. And when you can kind of see the root of where your expectations of yourself and the pressure you put on yourself, it kind of becomes a bit clear of being like, that's so silly. Yeah. That's so daft. And when you can actually lay out and be like, that's really silly that I thought in a year's time I would be over grief or completed it. And it's sometimes things like that, expectations is something I really, really come up against.
I think my mind fires when you speak. But I think there's one big thing there is around, I think time moves differently when you're grieving. Mm-hmm. So I think so often, you said when your mum died, everyone was there. Mm-hmm. It affected everyone. But they move on. Yeah. They go back to their normal life. Yeah. And you're then living with this huge void in your life, all these complicated emotions. And that takes an awful long time to unravel. I don't think we ever fully unravel them. No. And I don't think we ever fully move on. Yeah. But, I mean, Natalie died, what are we now? She died almost 13 years ago. She could have died yesterday to me. For, 13 years is a really long time. And so it does warp time. And so totally. I think, again, those expectations, it's important to remember when you're expecting, like, oh, well, I should move on. It's a year later. Yeah. A year in grief land, it doesn't equate to the same amount of time.
It's almost like space when you actually think about it. Thinking about it now, just hearing you talk about it, it's almost like space, like how in you know, the movie Interstellar, like in the clicks in the film, and it was like that was a day passing by in everyday work. That is almost what grief is like. And for them, it's been like a couple of hours. On Earth, it's been a month. That is literally kind of what it feels like. Like, at the end of this week, it would be a year since my friend Poppy died. I feel literally like yesterday, or even like tonight, I'm living like getting the phone call from my mum. It's like, that is so, I can smell the day. I can feel it intrinsically. And so when around you kind of look and you're like, oh my God. It's like when you can put in grief the context of like being like, okay, a year ago, I was maybe doing a holiday. Like I went on holiday with friends last year, and that does feel like a year ago.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, it feels so long ago. Poppy dying is like yesterday.
Yeah.
It is so, and when you can lay it out like that, it can really, again, go back to giving yourself that compassion of, just be gentle with yourself. Like, time in grief is so fluid and just completely a different breed of its own.
Yeah, absolutely. A huge thank you to Hugh James Solicitors for sponsoring this first series of the Prevent the Preventable podcast. Now, having your life torn apart by a brain hemorrhage is one thing, but learning that it could have been prevented and it was due to a mistake in your medical treatment is truly devastating. And whilst nothing can change what has happened, Hugh James's clinical negligence team can support those who have suffered a brain injury or bereavement due to a mistake in their treatment. To find out more about how and if they can support you, head to our show notes now. But there's another word you were using, expectation. And I think that is so important to be aware of, you know, and I think it's this expectation of other people should be supporting me, you know, and I think there's two sides to that. One, which is perspective, you know, it's so important to you. Yes, it should be important to the people who care about you. Yes. But having the perspective to go, they might also have things going on in their life. You know, they don't wake up with the same, you know, huge feeling of grief that we do. Totally. And they might forget, and they're human. It doesn't mean they don't love you or support you. And you'd hope that they're there for you, but it's having that perspective to go, do they really care? What are their intentions? Maybe they don't get it. I think this is one thing that I really found helpful is that some people don't get it right all the time. None of us do, let's be honest. None of us get it right all the time. But the long and short of it is, do you know that they care? Even if they show up and they say the wrong thing, at least they've said something. It's the people who disappear. Those are the people that I found really difficult to deal with.
That's a pain. It's painful.
Yeah, but I think it also comes down to, and this is where it's hard for the person who's grieving, is
unbelievably,
communicating that and saying, on that day when it's an anniversary, I know I'm going to need support, or I know I'm going to need some space, and having that ability. People can't mind read, you know.
Words
so
out my mouth.
It's so incredibly important, and it's hard to communicate. It's really, really hard. It's loaded with anger and sadness, and you don't want it to come out in the wrong way. But preempting that as well is really important.
Absolutely.
Preempting those days, whether it's an anniversary, whether it's not an anniversary, but preempting those days where you're likely to, I don't know how I'm going to feel. So if you can just bear with me on those days, I'd really, that would really, really help me too.
As you were talking about that, it really made me think about in my group, one of my groups recently, and when we did sort of speaking about expectations, they said something and I was like, that's a harsh reality, but it is. When you can come to that, sometimes the relationships and friendships in your life can become a bit easier. It's a tough pill to swallow, but she was like, I think she heard it on a podcast like Matt Willis or something, but that just as much as how we are thinking about ourselves and how others aren't showing up for us or what we're going through, it's exactly the same for the people in your life. The long and short of it is that we will always think about us first. And that goes for the people in our lives who are supporting us too. And as you said, that doesn't mean that they don't care about us or that they don't love us and want to support us. But their first thought when they wake up in the morning is going to be about them. Multiple thoughts about their day is going to be about them. Doesn't mean that you don't factor into any of those thoughts or those considerations, but just as how we are sat thinking about how they're not there, this or that, they're thinking about their life too. And it is perfect, as you said. I remember the real accountability piece for me when I had fallen out with those friends a couple of years ago, of actually taking accountability of, I really expected them to mind read. I really did. And I remember being like, I never opened my mouth. And of course, going back to, I didn't know how to, but I was so angry at these people for not meeting an expectation that I had never told them about. They were fighting like a battle, like that was in my head. They had no idea about that. I had like this checklist for them. And it can feel like, especially in friendships, when you're like, yeah, but there's some things that are just basis. And I do get that there are some like written expectations, I guess, maybe of a friendship that you might have, that you feel like, I shouldn't have to say to my friend, text me, you haven't spoken to me in 3 weeks and my mum's just died. Come off it.
Yeah, check in on me.
I haven't got a spoon for you. And there are some relationships, I know this might not be able to apply for everything, but there are some times when you think, but did I open my mouth? Did I say what I needed, what I wanted from these relationships, what my and maybe like using the word expectations might feel a bit like high and mighty, but just being, kind of laying out, you're my friend and this is a really difficult time for me perhaps.
Yeah. And
I really want you to be there for me. Can you? What does that look like for you? What's your capacity like? But that, it is, yeah. I remember thinking of that person in my group saying, she's like, it really hit for me even 8 years later. I was just like, that's exactly it. As much as how we are thinking about us and how maybe someone isn't showing up for us, it's exactly the same for them. And as you said as well, other people have other shit going on in their life too. Yeah. And going right back to that beginning piece, what I was saying of it's like, they might be going through their stuff. And if they were to share that, we might be like, really? Is that what you're bothered about? But to them, that's really rocking their world. And so it's perspective, totally. Yeah. It kind of goes into, I always kind of really try to adapt to, and it's easier sometimes than most, but just nothing's personal. Yeah. Nothing is personal.
Yeah, exactly.
At all. And when you can really adapt to that, and it can fall sometimes into a just feeling nothing. And I have to be careful with myself that sometimes being like, no, but maybe that is personal, Amber. Yeah. Maybe you do need to have a conversation about that, perhaps. But kind of adapting to how that friend responds to me or isn't responding to me, it's absolutely nothing to do with me.
Yeah,
it's got nothing to do with me. A lot of things in life and how people respond and how we react is absolutely nothing to do with us. It is to do with lineage, childhood, so much more than just what the conversation is right here, right now.
That's why communication is so incredibly important. Yeah. Let's start thinking about in terms of somebody's listening today. Mm-hmm. They're going through grief, probably, quite early stages, let's say, or even, a bit further down the line. What are some of the 3 top tips, some like simple takeaway things that people can tangibly, actually go in action that are going to support them with their grief?
Mm-hmm. Okay, early stages. I always try and think back to me and kind of think if there were some things that I could have changed, and I feel like I wouldn't change a lot of things, but I would say in the immediacy, really try and rally like a core team around you. A core team, and when I say team, team you can think of like maybe mass on people. Your core team person could be one other person, a couple of friends, a family member, a colleague. Rally sort of like a team around you in a way, and kind of, it's hard because literally just what we were talking about, people can't be that for you, but of kind of your core team that kind of you can, in times of really big grief waves and whatever it might be in crisis, just kind of checkpoint there, I'd say. And even in that team, that might be a professional. It could be a professional. It could be a therapist, a mentor, a coach, whoever it might be, kind of looking around and being like, okay, who can kind of fill in like my home team, I kind of call. Second,
sorry to expand on that,
no,
would you think that having therapy at that point is something that you would recommend?
It's interesting. I think it's completely subjective. I think for people who are going maybe into a form of therapy, because I have a lot of people in my groups some people coming weeks, months into their losses. I think going into it, a therapy maybe so early on after a bereavement, it may not, and you may not be able to absorb the tools that you're being given in that. And if you're okay with that, and if you're just looking maybe for a space just to kind of, again, checkpoint you. So even like with a friend or a family, whether it is maybe being like once a week, we go out for a walk, that's your checkpoint, going there just to be like, just to, whether it's to talk about the grief, just to have company, just to have that safe person around you. But if that is in the form of a therapist, kind of maybe going in sort of thinking that, yeah, maybe, because I meet a lot of people who go to therapy or form of therapy quite immediate after their loss, and they come out, and it's not, sometimes it's really bad experience, Sometimes they walk away and they're like, it was all right, but I don't really know what I got from it. And I'm like, yeah, because your brain's frazzled.
Yep.
It's absolutely frazzled. It cannot absorb information at all in a way that maybe in a couple of months, maybe a year down the line, it might be able to. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't have to be for you. It just might be a different meaning for you. It might serve a different purpose of just being able to, each week, an hour with a therapist, whoever it might be, have that checkpoint.
Yep.
And again, the information, it might not stay, but you've had support.
Yeah.
You've had that support there. So I think it can be, I don't believe in. I really do dislike kind of like in the sector of how a lot of people don't get any support up until 6 weeks, and I just think what the hell are people meant to do for that 6 weeks after? Like, it's so crucial. So if it is having a therapist or a group or something in that time, just to hold that person, so be it. Yeah. Like, definitely try and find that. I'm hesitant to say to find like resources like mine, which is interesting.
Plug.
Yeah, but I'm not plugging. I'm saying of like, I have people who do. Sometimes I had literally someone the other day message and said, "My mum died yesterday."
Yeah,
and it is sometimes for some people it is like, I just need to find someone else on the internet who knows what this is like. That would be. But I am hesitant to actually recommend that because again, it's just information. Yeah. When you are just processing whether it is, it's been an anticipated death or a sudden, whatever it is, you are processing this. So being able to take in like reading a book. Load of people say to me they got a load of books after their loved one died and they read them and they're like, I'm just reading blank pages. Yeah. I was like that. Even I've only really just in the past couple of months really been able to build up my focus of reading a book again and being able to take other people's stories in. So I'd say if you are looking, you see that and you think, oh, I do want to listen, see that. Just be mindful. A little bit too much, a couple of podcasts, maybe one book, whatever you feel you can focus on, but just try not to overload yourself. It can be really exciting. I know that's the case. It can be like, oh my God, there's so many podcasts out there. There's so many books. There's so much research on it. You can delve in. And all in good time. Just be mindful of how much you're consuming because that can really, again, back to expectations. Someone could be sat here listening to this whose their mum died last week and hearing me talk about them being like, oh, yeah. It's like, listen to you. Yeah. It's so great that we have so much accessibility to people's stories, but to not let it kind of influence you as well.
It's also that pressure of, okay, I need to get on with this. I need to deal with it, right?
You're listening to someone who's 8 years in and 13 years for yourself as well. To if you're fresh into this being like, oh, I maybe want to be at a place like that, of that. It's so great for you to hear our stories and what we've gone through and how we've navigated through, but that we're in different time frames. Yeah. And it's okay. Just to be gentle.
Yeah. I think to expand on that though, I think you're right in saying like it's okay to pull in and out, and resources are helpful. I think also it's helpful as a toolbox.
Totally. Having, just keep it there.
Yeah, like you say, toolboxes are walking with somebody. Toolboxes are,
and things go in and out of them.
Yeah, exactly.
Things go in and out of them. Like my toolbox, my metaphorical toolbox has changed drastically throughout the years, and sometimes really frequent. Like, oh, I'm like, that doesn't serve me anymore. Done. Okay, now let's put this in. Sometimes it'll be like really sparse, and there'll be like maybe 1 or 2 things that are in there. Sometimes it'll be really full of load of stuff. That is the nicest of it, is that, and the niceness and kind of the accessibility of so much support now. There is an abundance of support now. Like when I was bereaved, I never even thought to go online to even think if there was anything out there. Now it is literally, you type in grief and there's just a smorgasbord of so much out there. So your toolbox can be brimming. Third is interesting, maybe like practical. I know everyone's not this way inclined, journaling. I know it's so basic. It's so
sometimes the basic things are so helpful though, aren't they? You don't need to make it complicated.
And do you know what it is? Why I got into journaling at the end of 2021, 2022 I'd say. And at first I was just like, I'm just giving this a go. It's a load of guff, but whatever. I'll give it a go, fine. And it was hard, and I know that blank page can be severely daunting. It is like and you're just seeing what your hand writes out. But I actually did an episode a while ago with my friend Megan, and it was all about grief in the body and the brain particularly. And she actually broke down to me why actually psychologically and neurologically journaling is so good. It's so much more to do with it's like the vagus nerve in your eyes. But actually the process of, and whether you are journaling about what has happened to you and your loved one, and that can feel being like, what do you mean write down like how my person died, what happened? You feel like that's like reliving my trauma. But there is something about how, you know, people might be listening and be like, they might have the experience of like how your brain just constantly relives that day, that moment, that phone call, where it might be, and you think, my brain is being so cruel to me right now. Like, why is it continuously showing me the most horrific experience of my life? And it's not that your brain is trying to be cruel to you, and she explains it a lot better, so forgive me if anyone who actually knows what this is about. But she basically said that like your brain isn't doing it to be cruel to you. Your brain is doing it because it is such a monumentous kind of like thing in your life. It doesn't want you to forget it. Yeah. And it's trying to like piece, if there's little loopholes in it and blank bits, it's constantly repeating it to see if you get it and it comes through. So writing it out just kind of helps with that storytelling. Yeah. And some people that I've met and who Megan had met when she mentioned it, said like, sometimes it takes time, sometimes you've got to repeat it. And there's something literally in the vagus nerve of doing it that really helps with that. And so now I know that info, I'm a lot more inclined to say, if you can, just try and journal. Doesn't matter as much because there is actually a fantastic psychological benefit to it. And it doesn't have to be pages and pages and pages, but getting in a routine of, you know, that's you time, completely you time. When I'm sat there with my journal on some days, sometimes it's like, great day, whatever. Yeah. Sometimes it's really tough day today. They say like a lot of like, you know, you journal to understand bits about yourself. And I feel it's been a fantastic tool to me. Completely. It's
also a very accessible tool, isn't it?
So accessible.
You know, you don't have to, apart from a journal, you don't have to pay,
on
you know,
your
for
phone.
it.
You could do it on your phone as well.
And I think it's just a really great opportunity to check in. Yeah. And I used to coach, do career coaching. I used to quite often recommend to my clients that they journaled, and we, you know, offer lots of prompts. But one of the best one is just sometimes checking in on how do I feel today? You know, totally. How do I want to feel? What do I need to do to get there? Yeah. You know, what are the tools I have available for me to get there? Yeah, that's a great point of having a prompt, because, like I said, looking at that blank page, if you're like, I don't really know how to start this, like, dear diary. It's daunting. Yeah. So maybe, having some prompts. So maybe before you start thinking about journaling, thinking about what is a prompt that I maybe want to check in with every single day. Yeah. Maybe if it's 0 to 10, how have you felt managing your grief today? Is there anything you're really proud of achieving today? Or like, how did you look after you today? And actually, because I think so much, I think that's another thing that I love of journaling so much, is that when we go back to thinking about of time, you can look back in a year and you get to that year mark of, say, someone dying, and you think, I've done absolutely nothing to support myself. I've not grown at all. I still feel like day one. And it's not true. Yeah. And so having something like a journal, and it is hard to go back through your journal, like in time of bereavement, it is agony. Like I'm due to do mine soon. I'm like, poor, brings me out in hives. But I know it will be so great for me, because I will go back to this week of last September when Poppy died and read my journals and how heartbroken I was and still am, but be able to see throughout the year of that I've still lived with that heartbreak, but that I've written down, and how have you looked after you today? And I've gone, you know what, I have. I blooming well have. I've been really good to myself. I've tended to my grief, and I've kept a log of it. And actually, it's actually physical proof. So when we get in our head and go, no, you haven't progressed, you haven't grown, you've got in your own handwriting the truth. Yeah. That's why I think journaling, I'm like, I get it now. Yeah. I get why journaling. It's a really great point of reference. Yeah. I think it can fill you with a lot of gratitude as well, that you have grown so much over that time, when it feels like you haven't. You know, you have. I think, you know, adding to the journaling prompts, just what am I grateful for today is a really great one, because it triggers that sense of gratitude that we have, that, yes, things are terrible, but, you know, there are still some things to be grateful for. Yeah. And anchoring into those is or onto them is really important. So, Amber, this has been such a delightful. So I literally could have had this episode go on for hours. But we are closing these podcasts with 3 questions, sort of quick fire questions. So the first one is, what is one non-negotiable for you in your routine, your habits, or your life that supports your health? Journaling. Yeah, it really is. And it's really become a fast one. Journaling morning and night. Yeah, twice a day. Yeah, sometimes it slips, but the morning one, never. Not it's a non-negotiable. Just starting my day off of kind of, you know, when you wake up really anxious or whatever it might be, just to the pages. So that's definitely a non-negotiable for me now. Yeah, great. And If you could get more people to understand one thing, what would that be?
In terms of grief, oh my God, there's so much. That your grief does not define you, I'd say. And it doesn't define you, but it is a huge part of you.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be a really beautiful, huge part of you. When you can hear that grief will be a part of you, dependent on where you are, you can think, grief, this horrible, ugly thing, a huge part of me. I don't want that to be anything of me. But, and I say with time, and I never be like, time is a healer, but with time and tending to it, it can be like your superpower, genuinely. Yeah. So grief doesn't define you, but it is a huge part of you, and that's okay.
Yeah, I love that. So you may have covered it in that by answering that, but do you have a motto for life? And if so, what is it?
I've said it earlier, but I will go back to it of not everything's personal. I think that's really my motto. It's been for quite a while. And it's not, don't take everything personally, but it's just that, yeah, not everything is personal. Not everything is personal. Sometimes some things have got nothing to do with you. And even holding that as well when we are thinking about how we're responding to people and like in our grief, of really sitting with, is my reaction, is this personal to the person or the experience we're going through? Or is this something that I'm navigating and I'm responding to completely different? But in the context of other people and relationships, I've really adapted to, and it's really aided me in a way that has actually really strengthened my relationships, because I'm able just to see through feeling like you're offending me or whatever it might be. Just nothing's personal. Nothing is personal. I'm a very laid back girly now.
Yeah,
I never used to be, but I'm a very laid back girl now.
It's helpful to navigate life being laid back, isn't it?
Yeah.
Amber, thank you so much. In terms of the Grief Gang podcast, we can link that all in our show notes. So anyone that wants to find any more details about you, we'll link it all
Perfect.
there. Thank you so much.
Thank
for
you,
joining
Fiona.
us.
Thank you so much.
I loved that episode with Amber, as bizarre as that is to say, given the topic that we were talking about. But as I said in the intro, she makes this topic so incredibly accessible and easy to talk about, which for many people, it certainly isn't. If you want to find out more details about how Amber can potentially support you with your grief, head to our show notes for more information. If you'd like more information on brain hemorrhages, make sure to head to our website. Again, the link is in our show notes. If anything that we mentioned today affected you, please do let us know if you have any questions or any comments too. We would love to hear them. And if you feel that this episode would help someone in particular, feel free to send it to them. The more we share these messages, the more we can support one another. And that is ultimately what this podcast is about. So until next time, keep preventing the preventable.